Usually when we talk about a cybersecurity threat, it happens right there on your screen. You click a bad link, a process hangs, or maybe a scary pop-up appears demanding cryptocurrency, and you immediately know something has gone terribly wrong.
Right. The attack is visible. It's happening within the environment you interact with every single day.
Exactly.
It relies on an interaction within the operating system itself. You download a payload or, you inadvertently execute a script. And then the malware begins running alongside your other applications, utilizing the same system resources.
Yeah, it's bound by the same general architecture as your web browser or your word processor.
Precisely.
But what happens when the intruder doesn't just break into the house, but actually sneaks onto the construction site and alters the blueprints before the foundation is even poured?
That is a much more terrifying scenario.
It really is. And today, we are speaking directly to you, the listener, about a threat landscape that operates entirely in the shadows of your hardware. We're pulling our insights from a really fantastic, highly technical breakdown by the cybersecurity firm OpSWAT.
Yeah, a document titled Architectures of the Infected Boot Sector.
Right. And the mission of our deep dive today is to really dissect the mechanics of these boot sector viruses. Malicious programs that seize absolute control of your machine before the operating system even fully wakes up.
Which is a wild concept.
Okay, let's unpack this. Think of your computer's startup sequence like a massive theatrical production. Normally, the operating system is the lead actor.
Sure.
When the curtain goes up, the OS walks on stage and runs the entire show.
No.
But a boot sector virus is, well, it's like a rogue stage manager.
I like that analogy.
Right. This stage manager sneaks into the theater in the dead of night, rewrites the script, changes the props, and fundamentally alters the lighting and the trapdoors before the actors even arrive at the theater.
So they have no idea.
Exactly. When the OS finally walks on stage, it performs exactly as directed, completely unaware that the play it is starring in has been entirely hijacked.
What's fascinating here is the sheer architectural advantage of that strategy. It's entirely about the race for execution priority.
The race to be first.
Exactly. The OpSWAT text illustrates that understanding when a virus strikes a system, hierarchy is vastly more important than understanding the specific malicious payload it carried.
Really. The timing is more important than the weapon itself.
Yes, absolutely. Because if an attacker can win that initial race, if they can establish a foothold before the Windows kernel or the Mac OS kernel even initializes, the traditional rules of digital security are just fundamentally bypassed.
Wow.
The operating system becomes a compromised observer of its own hardware.
Okay, so if this virus relies entirely on beating the operating system to the punch, the attacker's biggest hurdle isn't tricking Windows, right? It's figuring out how to inject code directly onto the physical hardware at the exact right millisecond.
That's the challenge, yes.
So how do they cross that physical gap? The source text points us toward the absolute foundation of storage architecture. It specifically highlights the master boot record, the MBR, and the volume boot record, the VBR.
Right, the absolute bedrock of the drive.
So why are these specific sectors the ultimate prize for a malicious program?
Well, to understand the gravity of compromising the MBR or the VBR, we have to really trace the exact sequence of events that occurs the moment you press the power button on your machine.
Okay, walk me through it.
So when power flows from the power supply to the motherboard, the CPU wakes up in a highly restricted state. It doesn't know what a hard drive is.
It's just a blank slate.
Basically, it doesn't know what a file system is, and it certainly has no concept of an operating system like Windows.
So what does it actually do?
The CPU's very first action is to look at a hard-coded memory address, which is called the reset vector, just to fetch its first instruction from the motherboard's firmware. And this firmware initiates the power on self-test, the POST. You've probably heard of that. It verifies the RAM and basic hardware components.
Right, so it's essentially the hardware doing a quick roll call to make sure all the physical parts are actually plugged in and responding before it tries to do any actual work.
Exactly. And, once the POST completes successfully, the hardware needs to hand off control to a software environment.
To get things moving.
Right. But the hardware cannot read complex file systems like NTFS or APFS yet. It needs a universal, dead simple starting point.
Which is where the boot sector comes in.
Yes. Historically, and this is still prevalent in many legacy systems or specifically formatted drives, the firmware is hard-coded to look at the very first physical sector of the primary storage device.
Very first one.
Sector 0, cylinder 0, head 0. It is exactly 512 bytes long.
That is tiny.
It's a microscopic sliver of physical disk space, and that is the master boot record.
Okay, so what happens with those 512 bytes?
The hardware blindly reads those 512 bytes, loads them directly into the system's active memory at a specific hexadecimal address, usually 0 by 1700, and just instructs the CPU to start executing whatever code is sitting there.
But hang on, I need to push back on this for a second.
Sure.
If the operating system is the brain of the computer that handles all the complex logic, memory allocation, and software execution, how can a program run before the brain is even turned on?
That's the magic of it.
But how does the computer know how to execute malicious code if Windows hasn't booted up to provide the necessary runtime environment?
Because the code inside the MBR is written in raw, unadulterated machine language.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it doesn't need a runtime environment, it doesn't need system APIs, and it definitely doesn't need Windows. The CPU processes these base-level hexadecimal instructions natively.
So it's speaking the hardware's native tongue directly.
Exactly. In a clean system, those 512 bytes contain a tiny legitimate program called a bootloader. And the bootloader's only job is to understand enough about the hard drive's partition table to locate the volume boot record.
The VBR.
Right, which then locates the actual operating system kernel, loads it into memory, and finally passes the baton.
Okay, so that's the normal relay race.
But if a virus has overwritten Sector 0, the hardware blindly loads the malicious machine code into memory and executes it.
Because it doesn't know any better.
The hardware has no concept of good or bad code. It only has the command next instruction.
So the hardware is incredibly powerful but incredibly dumb. It just follows the breadcrumbs exactly as they are laid out, without ever questioning who laid them.
It is the purest form of blind obedience. By overriding the MBR, the virus achieves pre-OS execution.
And that's the ultimate first mover advantage you mentioned.
Exactly. In computer architecture, execution privileges are organized into rings. User applications, like your web browser, run in ring 3, which is the least privileged state.
Okay.
The operating system kernel runs in ring 0, granting it deep control over hardware.
Right, ring 0 is usually the boss.
Usually. But a program that executes before the OS can manipulate the environment to operate at a higher privilege level, sometimes conceptually referred to as ring -1.
Ring -1. That sounds ominous.
It sits underneath the operating system, acting almost as a hypervisor. Whoever controls the boot sequence controls reality for the computer. The virus dictates exactly what the OS is allowed to see and do once it finally initializes.
Man, it's like putting a pair of augmented reality glasses on the stage manager before the play begins. When the OS walks on stage, it sees a completely different set, but it has no reason to doubt its own eyes because that's the baseline reality it was handed.
That's a great way to put it.
So we've established the architecture. These viruses live in the raw physical sectors of the hardware, and we know they act in that critical microscopic window of pre-OS execution.
Right.
But if the MBR is this deeply buried foundational piece of the hard drive, how does an attacker actually reach it? I mean, how do these infections navigate onto the system when traditional network attacks are designed to target the operating system itself?
Well, the OPSWAT text is highly specific about the method of infection, and it heavily emphasizes physical, tangible vectors.
Physical vectors,
Yeah.
like actual objects.
Exactly. While it is technically possible for an OS-level malware with administrative privileges to write down to Sector 0, the classic and highly potent vector is infected removable media, specifically USB drives.
Classic thumb drive.
Yeah. The text highlights that these infections often load during the startup phase, completely bypassing the network layer.
This shifts the entire paradigm of how we secure a network. I mean, we spend millions of dollars on enterprise firewalls, intrusion detection systems, deep packet inspection, and heuristic email filters.
Oh, massive amounts of money, yeah.
And all of those tools are guarding the digital perimeter. But a USB drive is a physical object. You are carrying the malicious code right past the digital security gates, walking into the building, and plugging it directly into the physical nervous system of the hardware.
The physical vector neutralizes the digital firewall. Network security appliances monitor TCP and IP traffic, They cannot inspect a block of flash memory sitting in someone's pocket.
Right, the firewall is looking at the Wi-Fi, not the USB port.
Exactly. When you insert a USB drive into a port, you are creating a direct hardware-to-hardware data bridge via the Universal Serial Bus Controller on the motherboard.
A direct physical bridge.
If that drive contains a corrupted or maliciously crafted boot sector, it is positioned perfectly to exploit the very startup sequence we just analyzed.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's map this to a real-world scenario for you listening right now. Imagine an employee finds a seemingly generic, unbranded USB drive in the lobby of their office building.
Happens all the time.
Curiosity takes over. They bring it to their workstation and plug it in, purely intending to see if there is a return-to-owner text file on it.
Innocent enough, right?
But wait, why is the simple act of plugging it in dangerous? If the operating system is already running, doesn't the user still have to double-click a malicious executable file to trigger an infection? How did the hardware itself facilitate the compromise just by being connected?
That assumption that execution requires a double click is exactly the vulnerability the architecture exploits.
Really?
Yeah. While modern operating systems have largely disabled features like auto run to prevent code from executing immediately upon insertion, the threat of a boot sector virus relies on the next system restart.
It waits.
Exactly. If the user plugs in the drive, finds nothing of interest, leaves it in the port, and later shuts down or reboots their machine, the entire threat landscape changes.
Because now the machine is waking up with the drive attached.
When the machine powers back on, the motherboard firmware initiates its boot sequence. During the POC, the hardware enumerates all connected devices, searching for a bootable volume.
And because many IT departments or motherboard manufacturers configure the BIOS to check removable media before the internal hard drive, usually to make it easier to install a fresh OS or run diagnostic tools, the hardware looks at the USB port first.
Precisely. The firmware sends an interrupt request specifically checking the USB drive for a master boot record.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the hardware reads sector 0 of the infected USB drive, loads the malicious machine code into memory at address 0 by 7C0, and executes it.
And the user never clicked a single file.
The operating system never had a chance to block it because the operating system hasn't even been located by the hardware yet.
That is wild. The hardware interaction itself, driven by the firmware's boot priority list, triggers the execution.
It leverages the computer's own standard operating procedure against it.
Okay, so the malicious code runs, and what does it actually do in that split second? Does it just sit in the RAM, or does it actively attack the internal hard drive?
The payload of the USB's boot sector virus is designed to immediately propagate. Operating from that highly privileged pre-OS memory space, the virus sends a low-level write command to the internal hard drive's physical sector 0.
So it targets the permanent drive.
It overwrites the legitimate MBR on the machine's primary storage with a copy of itself.
Sneaky.
It essentially copies its malicious blueprint from the USB drive to the foundational sector of the computer.
And then what? Does it crash?
Usually no. Once the write is complete, the virus typically passes execution back to the legitimate boot sequence, so the operating system loads normally. The user notices absolutely nothing.
The Trojan horse has been brought inside the gates, and the soldiers have already infiltrated the command center.
That's exactly it.
The next time that employee boots up their computer, even if they have completely removed the USB drive and thrown it in the trash, their own hard drive is now natively launching the virus. It has become self-sustaining.
Yep, the physical vector did its job.
So, the hardware architecture has been compromised. The malicious code is running beneath the operating system. What does this invisible stage manager actually do? How does it interact with the security tools we rely on? And what are the tangible symptoms for the user?
Well, the OPSWAT document categorizes this into how they work and the resulting symptoms. The operational defining feature is profound stealth.
Stealth, okay.
Because the virus controls the boot process, it acts as a hypervisor, intercepting the operating system's communications with the hardware.
So it's sitting in the middle.
Yes. From this hidden vantage point, it can execute malicious code, modify system files on the fly, and eventually trigger symptoms like complete boot failure, severe performance degradation, or the total inability to access storage devices.
Let's deeply analyze this concept of stealth, specifically the phrase hiding from standard operating system security. If a user has an enterprise-grade endpoint detection and response agent running, or a highly rated heuristic antivirus continuously scanning their system, why wouldn't that software immediately flag the corrupted MBR? I mean, the antivirus has deep access to the system files. It should be able to see that Sector 0 has been modified, right?
To understand the stealth, you have to understand API hooking and interrupt interception.
Okay, lay it on me.
An antivirus program, no matter how sophisticated, is a piece of software running inside the operating system.
Right.
When the antivirus wants to scan the master boot record, it cannot reach out and physically touch the hard drive platter.
It doesn't have hands.
Exactly. It must send a request, an IO request packet, or IRP, down through the operating system's storage stack. It asks the Windows kernel, which asks the storage driver, please read Sector 0 and return the data to me.
It has to ask the system for permission to view the file, like requesting a document from an archivist.
Exactly. But remember, the boot sector virus loaded first. It sits between the operating system and the raw hardware. Yeah. When the antivirus sends that IRP down the stack requesting Sector 0, the virus intercepts the request.
It catches the request midair.
It recognizes that security software is trying to look at the infected MBR. So instead of allowing the read request to hit the physical sector where the malicious code lives, the virus redirects the request to a hidden sector on the hard drive where it stashed a backup copy of the original clean MBR.
Are you kidding me?
I'm serious. It serves this clean data back up the stack to the antivirus.
That is deeply insidious. So the antivirus analyzes the data, sees a perfectly pristine, cryptographically verifiable master boot record, and gives the system a green check mark of health.
Yep, it says everything is fine.
It is literally hallucinating a clean system because the virus is feeding it falsified telemetry. The security software is functioning perfectly, but its sensory input is entirely controlled by the malware.
It subverts the root of trust. If you cannot trust the data being returned by your own system calls, no software-level security tool can guarantee your safety.
It's a perfect illusion.
It is the digital equivalent of a perfect illusion. The virus can maintain this illusion indefinitely, silently downloading secondary payloads, exfiltrating keystrokes, or mapping the internal network, all while the OS reports a perfectly healthy state.
Wait a minute, I'm looking at the symptoms section of the OPSWAT text, and there's a glaring contradiction we really need to address here.
What's that?
The text states these viruses are apex predators of stealth, perfectly hiding from the OS and security tools. Yet, the listed symptoms are incredibly loud. Computer failure to boot, terrifying error messages during startup, erratic slow performance, and total inability to access storage devices.
Oh, right, the noise.
Yeah. If the entire architectural advantage of a boot sector virus is to remain invisible and silently execute code, why on earth would it cause the computer to crash or throw massive error messages on startup? Explain to me. Imagine you're looking at your computer display, and suddenly you see a black screen with bold white text screaming, boot device not found, or system failure.
It's terrifying to see that on your screen.
Exactly. So why intentionally cause a system failure? That completely blows its cover.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture of modern cybercrime, we have to distinguish between the delivery mechanism and the ultimate payload.
Okay, the delivery versus the payload.
The stealth is the delivery mechanism. The virus wants to ensure it cannot be detected, quarantined, or removed by automated software while it positions itself. It hides perfectly to ensure it establishes absolute control.
To dig its claws in.
Right. But once it has that control, the objective of the attacker often shifts from espionage to extortion or destruction.
So the noise isn't a failure of the stealth. The noise is the objective.
Exactly. Consider modern ransomware variants like Petya or NotPetya, which specifically targeted the MBR.
Oh, those were brutal.
They really were. The virus uses its ring-1 privileges to silently encrypt the master file table, the critical index that tells the operating system where every single file is located on the hard drive.
The map of the whole drive.
It does this quietly in the background. Once the encryption is complete, the virus intentionally crashes the system, forcing a reboot.
Oh, I see where this is going.
When the machine attempts to turn back on, the virus displays a ransom note directly from the bootloader. You're staring at your computer display, and instead of the Windows logo, you see bold, blocky text saying, "Your files are encrypted. Send Bitcoin."
Long before Windows can even attempt to load.
Exactly. The inability to boot, the erratic performance leading up to the crash, the inaccessible storage, these aren't bugs. They are the highly orchestrated finale of the attack.
The grand finale.
The stealth ensured the bomb was planted securely. The symptoms are the explosion.
The victim powers on their machine, expecting their familiar login screen, and instead they are hit with a stark, raw text environment demanding payment, with their entire digital life locked behind military-grade encryption.
And there's nothing they can do.
The OS is completely helpless because the OS doesn't even exist in the machine's memory at that moment. This explains why an attack on the boot sector is so devastating.
It's a complete takeover.
To understand how this threat has managed to survive and remain relevant, we really need to look at the historical timeline provided by OPSWAT. Hardware architecture has evolved radically over the last 30 years.
It's completely transformed, yeah.
So how has a virus designed to attack a 512-byte sector on a spinning magnetic disk managed to survive the transition to solid-state drives and modern motherboards?
Well, the OPSWAT document outlines the types of boot sector viruses, charting an evolutionary arms race.
An arms race.
It explicitly contrasts the older legacy forms with modern, highly sophisticated variants. The older forms were the FBRs, the floppy boot record viruses.
Taking us back to the 90s.
Right. These targeted the raw boot sectors of magnetic floppy disks. As storage evolved, attackers developed DBRs, DOS boot record viruses.
Moving on to hard drives.
Exactly, targeting the partitioned boot sectors of early hard drives running DOS. The physical medium changed from a flexible disk to a rigid platter, but the core vulnerability, the hardware's blind execution of the first physical sector, remained identical.
It's the ultimate parasitic adaptation. The host environment changes, the floppy disk drive is entirely removed from computer manufacturing, so the parasite simply mutates to latch onto the DOS hard drive.
It just finds the next vulnerable target.
But that brings us to the modern era. We don't use DOS anymore. The master boot record itself is increasingly being replaced by the shut-wide partition table, or GPT, on massive NVMe solid-state drives.
Right, the architecture is totally different now.
So what does this all mean for the threat landscape today? If the specific hardware architectures of the 90s and 2000s are essentially extinct, why is OPSWAT warning us about this now?
Because the concept didn't die.
The text mentions modern variants taking the form of boot kits that target UEFI and BIOS firmware. How does jumping from the hard drive to the motherboard firmware make this ancient concept a persistent, modern nightmare?
The jump to UEFI is the most critical evolutionary leap in this entire landscape. BIOS, the basic input and output system, and its modern, highly complex successor, UEFI, the Unified Extensible Firmware Interface, are not located on the hard drive.
Wait, where are they?
They are hard-coded into an SPI flash memory chip soldered directly onto the motherboard.
Soldered onto the board itself.
Yes. UEFI is essentially a miniaturized operating system in its own right. It has its own network stack, its own file system drivers, and its own execution environment.
Wow, I didn't realize it was that complex.
Oh, it's very complex. By evolving into UEFI boot kits, attackers realized they didn't need to fight over the hard drive's boot sector anymore. They could compromise the motherboard itself.
Okay, but if the UEFI has its own network stack and file system drivers, it's not just blindly reading 512 bytes anymore, right? It's executing complex software applications before Windows even starts.